Welcome to the deep dive. Ever sort of wondered why, the person building your app seems to think so differently from the scientist discovering some new data?
Oh, yeah. It's a common thing to notice. They seem to operate on different wavelengths sometimes.
Exactly. And figuring out these fundamental differences between researchers and developers, it's not just academic. It can genuinely help teams work better together, set expectations that actually make sense.
Totally. You avoid a lot of friction that way.
So today, that's our mission. We're going to try and decode these mindsets. We've got some really great source material that uses these everyday analogies. Should make things pretty clear.
Yeah, the analogies are helpful. They kind of give you that aha moment. It's about understanding how they tick deep down.
Right, getting the inside scoop. We want to give you a clear step-by-step look at these different ways of thinking.
Sounds good. It really helps to see why one person might spend ages on a tiny detail while the other's pushing to get something, anything, working by Friday.
Okay, let's dive in then. Where does the source material suggest we start?
Well, it breaks it down nicely. Starts with their basic goals, what they're trying to achieve. Then how they deal with limitations, roadblocks.
Okay.
Then scope how wide or deep they think. Uh, Communication styles, which is a big one.
Oh, yeah, definitely.
And inevitably, why communication sometimes breaks down. And even why a researcher might seem to just, well, give up on explaining something.
Interesting. Okay, let's tackle those goals first. The core difference. Developers, the material says they're about creating a working product, right? Usually now.
Exactly now. The analogy is the chef, right? Customer's waiting, pizza needs to be ready in, say, 10 minutes.
Right. Go, go, go.
Yeah. And maybe they don't have the perfect fancy Italian cheese. They'll use what's on hand, make something good enough that the customer can eat now.
The key is the deliverable. Something functional, usable, fast.
That's the priority.
Yeah.
Practical application, working within constraints, time, budget, whatever, get it done. It's about that tangible result.
Okay, so that's the developer mindset. Now, contrast that with the researcher. What's their goal? It's not that immediate pizza, is it?
No, not at all. They're after the fundamental truth, you could say. The analogy shifts to a recipe researcher.
Okay, not the busy chef anymore.
Right. This person is meticulously testing everything.
Yeah.
Different flours, yeast types, oven temps, proofing times, all to create the perfect, absolutely reliable pizza recipe.
So it's about understanding why it works.
Precisely. Why does this flour behave differently than that one? They want a deep understanding, a process that is robust, repeatable, perfect every time, even if it takes way longer. Reliability over speed.
Makes total sense. Functionality now versus fundamental understanding for later. Okay, so these different goals must really impact how they handle limitations, roadblocks.
Oh, hugely. It's a really clear difference. So a developer hits a snag. What do? Usually find a quick fix, a workaround, something to bypass the issue and keep the project moving.
Right, keep the wheels turning.
Yeah. Take the example of like a biased die. Developer rolls it 100 times, gets way too often, maybe 25% of the time, instead of the expected 16-ish%.
Okay, that's definitely off.
The developer's reaction. Likely, this die is busted, they'll grab a new one, or maybe find a different way to generate randomness. They don't necessarily dig into why the die is weird.
Fix the immediate problem, maintain the system's function, got it. But the researcher, same weird die, different reaction.
Totally different. The researcher sees that 25% result and thinks, interesting. Is 100 rolls actually enough to know for sure it's biased?
Ah, okay. They question the data first.
Exactly. So what do? More rolls, way more, maybe 10,000, then maybe 100,000. Meticulously tracking if that probability starts to edge closer to the theoretical 16th or if it stays weirdly high.
So they're not just saying it's broken, they're trying to pin down how it's broken or under what conditions it might still be predictable.
Precisely. The researcher identifies and quantifies the limitation. They might conclude, okay, with this specific die, you need at least 100,000 rolls to get a stable probability.
Yeah.
They map the boundaries.
That's a fundamental difference in approach. One fixes, one defines. Okay, what about the scope? How broadly do they think?
Well, the material suggests developers often operate within their familiar domain, the stuff they know well.
Makes sense. Their area of expertise.
Yeah, like the chef analogy again, maybe they know 10 dishes inside and out, pasta, steak, couple of salads. They nail those.
Okay.
But then a customer asks for something totally different. Kimbap, let's say. Something the chef has maybe never even heard of.
Uh-oh.
Yeah. They might freeze up or try to awkwardly make a weird sushi roll using ingredients they do know or just say, sorry, can't do it. They solve problems using their existing toolkit.
Working within that comfort zone, applying known solutions.
Right. Whereas researchers
Mm.
are often more comfortable heading into the unknown. They're
Gotcha.
the Kimbap investigators.
Huh.
They don't just say don't know it, they dig in. Research recipes, find out about the right seaweed, the fillings, the rolling technique. They experiment to understand it, maybe even create new variations.
So they're okay with ambiguity, with exploring new territory.
Very much so. Their job often is to explore that uncharted territory and define it. They expect that iterative process of discovery.
So leveraging existing knowledge versus expanding the boundaries of knowledge. Okay, this has got to lead to different communication styles then.
Absolutely. Huge implications for communication. Developers tend to communicate around practical goals, tangible targets.
Like metrics.
Exactly. Think about, say, an AI for recognizing apples.
Right.
Project goal. 97.5% accuracy on 100 test images. The developer builds it, runs the test,
Yeah.
gets 80%.
Oof, missed the target.
Right. So the developer's communication is likely, okay, we're at 80%. We need more work, more optimization to hit that 97.5%.
Yeah.
The focus is closing that gap to the target number.
Very deliverable focused, hit the spec.
Yep. Now, the researcher, same situation, same 80% result.
Mm-hmm.
Their communication is different. They communicate the truth as they see it from the data.
Which might not be about hitting the number.
It might be explaining why the number is what it is. They might say, well, actually, getting 97.5% with only 100 training images, that might be statistically unlikely.
Ah, okay. Pushing back on the goal itself.
Or at least explaining the limitations. They'd explain why. Maybe the 100 images were all perfect red apples. The AI never learned about green ones or bruised ones or weird shapes. The data is insufficient.
So explaining the underlying reasons, not just the result versus target.
Exactly. They'd probably show data, maybe graphs. See? Accuracy improves as we add data, but it kind of plateaus here. That original target might just be unrealistic with this small data set. It's about objective constraints.
Wow. Okay. You can immediately see how that could lead to friction, the communication breakdown point.
That's the core of it, often. The source material highlights this. Breakdowns happen when the developer maybe doesn't fully grasp or perhaps doesn't accept the truth the researcher is presenting.
The objective reality of the situation.
Yeah. Back to the AI. Researcher explains, look, 100 images isn't enough for 97.5% accuracy because XYZ. If the response is, well, just optimize the code better, or are you sure you can't just try harder?
Implying it's an effort thing, not a fundamental limit.
Exactly. That's where it falls apart.
Yeah.
The developer isn't acknowledging the constraint the researcher identified with data. It's like that customer telling the chef who doesn't know kimbap, just try harder, make the kimbap.
Right. Ignoring the reality that the chef lacks the fundamental knowledge and ingredients.
The source uses a great analogy. Speaking different languages. Researcher, English. Talking objective limits, probability. Developer, French. Maybe talking effort, meeting the spec, hitting the target. Without that shared understanding, that common ground.
The conversation just stops being productive.
Pretty much. Meaningful dialogue requires accepting certain realities.
Which brings us to that potentially awkward point. Why a researcher might sometimes seem to give up.
Yeah, and it's not usually about laziness or lack of commitment. The core idea is that some demands are just impossible. They violate the limits of reality.
Like trying to fly by, flapping your arms.
Kind of. Or like the dice example again. You cannot guarantee that each side will come up exactly 16.6% of the time in only 100 throws. It's statistically improbable. Same with the AI. You can't force super high accuracy from fundamentally poor or insufficient data.
It's a boundary set by the situation itself, not by skill or effort.
Correct. So if the researcher lays this out clearly, objectively, with data, here's the limit, here's why, and the response is still emotional or dismissive, just figure it out or you're not trying hard enough. What more can they say?
Right. They've presented the facts.
They've explained the objective constraints. If that explanation isn't heard or accepted, continuing to argue becomes, well, pointless, maybe even demoralizing.
So they might disengage.
They might choose to step back, yeah. And maybe look for collaborators who do operate on that shared understanding of reality. It's about recognizing when a path is built on impossible expectations.
Okay, that paints a really clear picture. So summing it all up, the big takeaway is this fundamental split in mindset driven by different goals.
Yeah. Developers, focused on the functional, the immediate, working within known areas, building the thing.
Getting the pizza out the door.
Exactly. Researchers, driven by understanding the why, the fundamental truth, defining limits, exploring the known and the unknown.
perfecting the recipe.
That chef versus recipe researcher analogy really does capture it well, doesn't it? Both vital, but different drives.
And understanding that difference is key to avoiding those communication clashes when the researcher's truth bumps up against the developer's practical target.
Absolutely. It requires acknowledging those underlying realities researchers uncover.
This has been super insightful, really clarifies those dynamics you see sometimes. So maybe a final thought for our listeners. Think about your own work, your own experiences. Have you seen this researcher versus developer dynamic play out? Maybe without even realizing it, where one person was all about execution now, and another was trying to understand the deeper why.
Yeah, reflecting on that could be useful.
And consider how understanding these different modes, goals, limitations, scope, communication could help you collaborate better or set more realistic goals next time. And maybe ask yourself, which way do you lean naturally, and how can you bridge the gap with people who think differently? Definitely something to chew on.
It really is. Valuing both perspectives, that researcher curiosity and that developer drive to build, that's probably where the magic happens.